Hello and welcome everyone to the Dialogue Institute at Austin's Meet the Author Series 3. I'm your host, Fethullah from Dialogue Institute at Austin. In the previous series, we hosted Dr. Craig Considine and Dr. Jill Carroll, and today we have Dr. Tom Gage here with us to talk about his book, Gülen's Dialogue on Education, a Caravanserai of Ideas. Here is his book. Dr. Gage, welcome.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sayin, and I very much appreciate the Dialogue Institute of Austin hosting this discussion.
Yeah, okay. So let me introduce you to our audience, and I believe your biography is going to amaze them as well. So you can follow it on the description of the description section of this YouTube video. So Professor Tom Gage has enjoyed a successful 6-decade career in education. He has taught courses for all levels with 3 decades at Humboldt State University. Dr. Gage's book, Gülen's Dialogue on Education, a Caravanserai of Ideas, is a freewheeling exploration that connects the 20th-century educational philosophers and innovators, John Dewey and to Montessori, to Vygotsky, and more, to the Turkish educator and inspirational figure Fethullah Gülen. Gage has been involved with the Middle East since 1950s, following a hitchhiking year that landed him in Damascus in 1959. He returned to the University of California at Berkeley, where he earned his BA, MA, and PhD degrees. He is a Fulbright scholar who taught in Aleppo, Syria for an academic year in 1983 to 84, and has also taught in China, Turkey, and Greece. In the 1970s, Gage served as Dean of 3 summer programs held in 8 European nations. Dr. Gage has authored, co-authored, and edited, consulted on 20 books. In 2013, his ebook, American Prometheus, was recognized with 2 silver awards from the Independent Book Publishers Association, one in history for illuminating digital publishing excellence, and the other for the best regional ebook for the Eastern region of the US. As Professor Emeritus of the California State University System, Gage continues to teach in the Usher Lifelong Learning Institute at the Humboldt campus. Over the last decades, he has interviewed academics and authors on TV. He has initiated and participated in the development of software that won the Best of Best Award in the Educational Software of the Association of Supervision and Instruction for the year 2000. So welcome again, Dr. Gage.
Thank you very much.
Before we start, I would like to remind our audience that they can participate and ask their questions through our live chat. And now I'd like to jump right into the questions. So let me show the book one more time here. So this is an amazing book, definitely, and I am suggesting it to all our audience. So Gülen's Dialogue on Education, a Caravanserai of Ideas. It's an amazing scholarly work, and it is the product of a great academic study. One thing that grabbed my attention in the title is the word Caravanserai, which is used several times throughout the book. And its first use is in the introduction part, where you make us imagine a Turkish caravanserai, which somehow took us to the past. And in other chapters, the word is also used in much broader sense. Could you please tell us first about a title and a term caravanserai used in connection to the ideas?
Well, I've always marveled at the bazaar, the caravanserai, the souk, the khan, where I have traveled, where people come together and exchange commodities and sell products and just discuss. And it's an incredible center that Americans should have the experience of seeing. And the book's title really came from the idea that these writers, John Dewey, through Maria Montessori, Lev Vygotsky, James Moffat, is a cumulative kind of evolution of ideas. And the book was organized in terms of its structure, both as a kind of collection in the Caravanserai of global educators. They come from many places, and there could have been others. There could have been Krishnamurti from India. I even have spent time in Chufu, which is the hometown of Confucius, where you have stone books that can't be destroyed. And I think it's something to return to in this age of Twitter. So I think that there's a great number of other people that I just didn't include because I was trying to link up the connections with the work of the scholar Fethullah Gülen, who in many ways has links with many of the people that I've written about, from Vygotsky to Bloom to Piaget to Bandura. And this is a caravanserai of not only a lot of people coming together, but they're coming together chronologically. So John Dewey came first. John Dewey was a philosopher who, in fact, his work here in the United States was brought to the attention of other nations. He had gone to Mexico, to Russia, to China, and in the 1930s to Turkey, where he worked to share his thoughts. So you can sort of see this panorama of international writers, but at the same time, each one of these writers influence subsequent writers. And so it's chronological in that sense, it's global. And it really derives from the source, which was the course I taught for 33 years in the master's degree in the teaching of writing that I established at Humboldt State University, my course being the development of writing abilities. And as you know, it peppers the pages throughout the book. But basically, my course was not structured the way the book is. But in the idea of the development of writing abilities, I touch on theory, I touch on research, and I touch on pedagogy. And in each of these areas, these writers take part. The title of the course, Development of Writing Abilities, technically is Sociolinguistics and Sociolinguistics, but it comes from a very good chronological study in the United Kingdom called The Development of Writing Abilities. The London Schools Council in the late 60s, early 70s developed a means of assessing student writing, which is what my main interest has been in over my career, in 42 schools in England and Wales in the subject areas of history, science, religious education, which is required in England, and English and mathematics. So that's where the course comes from, but the course and the background for the book comes from what I've been teaching in a graduate program.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's really amazing. And so I would like to learn how you came across with the Hizmet movement and met Fethullah Gülen. But I also wonder about the two influential people you had the honor to meet during your college years. And one of these inspiring people is Martin Luther King Jr., and the other is James Kemper, the former ambassador to Brazil of that time. Could you please briefly share your encounter with these amazing people, the details of which are not mentioned in the book? And then also please tell us your story that led you to the Hizmet and Fethullah Gülen.
Yes, I think this is a kind of interesting history because at the University of California in 1957, I became very involved in helping the students who were Hungarian freedom fighters in Hungary that had been overrun by the Soviet tanks. And we had many of them stalled in New Jersey. And I was able to find a place for a number of them in fraternities and hashing in sororities so that they and the university, allowing them in, could continue their studies. That was in 57. And the very next year, I took off to travel, which you've already cited. But on return, that's when I met the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And I had been a scholar with the Kemper insurance world. I mean, I was one of the Kemper scholars and worked in San Francisco on Montgomery Street for Lumbermen's Mutual. every summer. I met the ambassador because of I had worked in an encampment where he was a participant. He was ambassador to Brazil under President Eisenhower, and we got to know one another. And I've been very fortunate in meeting people in my life. And he encouraged me to continue on with insurance. I was offered to continue rather than to go into teaching with law school at Hastings. And after that, I would go into the Kemper insurance business as the administrative assistant to James Flanagan, then the president of the board of Kemper Insurance. So I was hard pressed. But if you see that context of of Ambassador Kemper, of Martin Luther King, and it's also 1960 we're talking about, and John Fitzgerald Kennedy said, "Don't ask you what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." In time, I found that what Fethullah Gülen was achieving with 800 schools around the world, very much in the tradition of Maria Montessori, or what has followed in the wake of John Dewey, is really a mission, a statement embodied in a book the University of California recently published that Martin Marty edited, called Hizmet Means Service. And if you see in that book's title, what I infer is that Gülen and the Hizmet movement is saying, don't ask what the world can do for you, but what you can do for the world. And I think that many of the people who have participated in the schools and in other endeavors realize that this writer-poet from Turkey in no way has supervised or really overseen these developments. They're developed by people who've been so inspired by his words. And I had the fortune in 2011, I believe it was, of visiting Fethullah Gülen in Pennsylvania with 3 other professors, 2 from Texas, one from the University of Texas and another from Texas Tech, and a professor of law from Moscow. And we had dinner and he's very ill and he does not speak English, so we had our translators, but I had a wonderful opportunity to ask him questions.
Yeah, I'm glad that you had a chance to meet the people who made history, and I'm sure you had more encounters with other important people as well. And there are many areas that Fethullah Gülen inspired people around the world, which are social, cultural, charitable, and educational areas and activities. And you picked his educational contributions and linked them to the ideas of worldwide known educational theorists and philosophers, as you have mentioned, just like him. And those 8 modern time educators that are mentioned in the order of the book are Dewey and Montessori, Vygotsky, Hahn, Piaget, Bloom, Bandura, and Moffat. So how did you decide to choose these scholars who are all from different parts of the world?
Well, you see, I don't, in a way, Gülen is when I talk about theory, pedagogy, and research, in a way, as my colleague, emeritus professor at the University of Texas, Edmund Farrell, said, he is kind of like a 19th century philosopher, and his ideas simply are taken by others and put into practice. And I think that they've been remarkable achievements in all of the endeavors. Kim Se-yok Mu. He has written in The Statue of Our Souls a rather interesting enumeration of 8 areas where education for students in the realm of secular education that conforms to the standards of the country in which the Hizmet school is developing, conforms to that community, to that national mission in educating its citizens. And that's kind of where I've been so impressed by the history of how, in the painting that we'll talk about in a second or in some minutes, bears upon how I appreciate what Gülen has spread. I think that if you look at Montessori and you look at Dewey, you have two of the great movers in education at the beginning of the last century. Dewey goes back even further. Dewey actually was moved by a poet, Coleridge, and by Wordsworth. And there's a poem by Wordsworth that I just want to suggest and mention. And it's from the prelude, and it goes, "This story would speak of interminable building, reared by observations of affinities in objects where no brotherhood existed for passive minds." That line, which both Dewey and myself have been very moved by, really gets at so many things. Very simple language, but it's the observations of affinities in objects that no brotherhood of passive minds exists, are interested in. And I think this is a key thing. We're looking for those commonalities among all people, and the school is a gathering place for the sharing of the students' backgrounds and the culture's ethics, and develop citizenship. So I think that in terms of the civic and social mission of Hizmet is exceptional, and we should all good fortune. When we look at research, we go to Vygotsky, who in fact addressed the kind of students that Montessori dealt with, the younger child. Vygotsky's discovery that really corrected Piaget in the book. Vygotsky precedes Piaget, but Piaget had published and Vygotsky had read his work in the Soviet Union and built upon it. And there's an interesting tension between the two. Piaget is considered an epistemological geneticist. That means he's looking at the genetic nature of intelligence, and it's within the single individual. Vygotsky, on the other hand, through research, through empirical research, demonstrated how language is acquired from the public, and it is internalized, not in egocentric speech, as Piaget said, but in terms of inner speech. It's the kind of speech we had when we think, we discuss, we analyze, we refute ourselves. And some people think talking to yourselves is crazy, but we do it silently, don't we? Well, that is thought. That's what Vygotsky landed, as thought. And so we have empirical studies of Vygotsky, of Bloom, of Piaget, Bandura, and I see that these all accrete. Now we look upon Dewey. If you take a class in Dewey, you'll say, well, Dewey changed his mind later in life and moved away from the sort of social learning aspect of experimentation, the progressive movement. And later in life, he became interested in art. And it's not so much that he became interested in art, that the work of Montessori, the work of Moffat, of all of these people, Moffat comes later, quite a bit later, but it's the kind of pedagogy in art education that so moved Vygotsky. One person in mind that should have had a chapter is Louise Rosenblatt. And she was a great scholar and researcher in the act of reading. So I see this cumulative effect in education to where we are today. And to me, you have in Fethullah Gülen, who has a background in education. He's not done research. He doesn't have a doctorate in some university. And James Moffat, who I think is probably one of the most important figures in education in the last century. And many agree with me. I just finished a lecture this last week with Georgetown University Graduate School talking about Moffat. But Moffat comes from a similar kind of a background. Gave lectures at universities, but he did not have a university position. And so when you read Moffat, he wrote 3 books: A Universal Discourse, the Student-Centered Language Arts Curriculum, K through 13, and Points of View. And what you have here is a holistic thinker like Fethullah Gülen. You have a person whose theory created a kind of universal, a universal field concept of language arts and literature. And the impact of Moffat has yet to really be realized, but I think they're parallel one another in terms of Fethullah Gülen and Moffat.
Yeah, thank you. So while you're explaining, I was thinking that all these great intellectuals, when we were learning about them in colleges, we usually have the comparisons between all those, but you basically connected them all. That's one of the greatest things. And considering that, I was also thinking, so how did you see the connections among all of these scholars? I think it mustn't be very easy because one is a behaviorist, one is a constructivist, the other is a cognitivist. So, or they have holistic ideas or different educational perspectives and different educational models, but you made the connection among all. And actually you made a kind of dialogue between them all. And how did you come up with these connections? And then is it like before you learned about Gülen and Gülen inspired schools, or did it just help you to start with this study?
Two responses to that excellent question. I go back to that poem by Wordsworth, Observations of affinities in objects. Observation of affinities in objects, where no passive minds exists. And what that says to me is not that Vygotsky is different from Bandura, which creates a kind of an opposition, but it's the affinities which bring out this overall holistic vision, and that kind of relates to Fethullah Gülen, or it relates very directly to him. I did not have, I only came across Fethullah Gülen in 2007 at a conference in San Francisco, the Rock Rose Institute, which was on peace and reconciliation, featuring Madeleine Albright, Desmond Tutu by television, by equivalent to Zoom, and Elie Wiesel. At that conference, I had discussed some of the things I had experienced. I'd done a lot of work in Turkey. I had been published in a journal on Çelik Güllersoy, who did much to create changes in the area of tourism, but not just tourism, a kind of bringing together of what was the past of Turkey and the present. And I became personal friends with Çelik, and so I had this experience in Turkey, and then I was sharing this at that conference in 2007, and a member of the Hizmet movement invited me to speak at Austin, where I really began to learn. And then subsequently, I spoke at the Erasmus University in the Netherlands. I spoke at Fethi University in Turkey, in Morocco. So I have been exploring and learning, and so it was a great fortune to meet him later.
Yeah. I'm glad that you made it.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm too.
And you also mentioned in the book, Fethullah Gülen is an educational theorist and philosopher, but he doesn't have a pedagogy or a curriculum. And like you also mentioned, as in some other theorists. But what are Mr. Gülen's main contributions to the contemporary curriculum based on your book?
Well, I'm interested in how Fethullah Gülen has enumerated these 8 categories. And one of the questions I posed to him at dinner that night through the translator was asking him to elaborate on the last, the 8th, which had to do with art education. I am interested in how Fethullah Gülen made a distinction between the student learner in the classroom who is not to be understood as somebody who just receives what is delivered by the teacher, but the true educator is one who understands that the child needs to bring together her own thoughts in order to realize really what Piaget was talking about in terms of in learning. It's the student who has a different kind of a life experience, comes to the classroom and finds maybe dissonance. And so what does the student do? The student accommodates. And what that means is that, well, I'll try to sort of look at things differently. And in that looking at things differently, it's assimilation. And that process of accommodation and assimilation brings about adaptation. That was what Piaget said. And I think that's exactly what Fethullah Gülen is addressing. There's a difference between delivering of information. And mind you, I think one of the things I need to say is that what is so important among Dewey all the way to Moffat is one of the problems we've had in the United States education is we have inherited the wonderful contributions of John Locke in the 17th century. And Locke saw the mind as a blank slate. And the blank slate is to be added to. And that's what I think what Gülen said, that the teacher who is delivering information like a pitcher is filling up the glasses in the classroom, the mugs, that filling up is an inadequate metaphor. It's descriptively adequate in terms of testing, but it is explanatorily inadequate in explaining how students gain from education. That's a distinction that Noam Chomsky made in 1956. So the model that the Americans have had to really get rid of is, and not necessarily get rid of it because there's a great deal of work there, keeping in mind the affinities that we have in common, rather than what was wrong with the old way of doing things. What I think is important is that Gülen had this idea, and then he enumerated them in 8 different areas of study that should be part of the curriculum. And in fact, it's a part of the curriculum that has always been in the United States. The elementary school teacher facing 30 children, and in that one class, the elementary school teacher needs to cover 9 subjects according to the Education Code of California. That then, as the child gets a little bit older, goes into high school, and each of those different 8 areas become departments: Department of Math, Department of English, Department of Social Studies. And then the student goes on to the university and gets a degree in the Bachelor of Science, which is in fact all of those areas of geometry, mathematics, astronomy, and all of those areas, or in Bachelor of Arts, which would be grammar, rhetoric, logic, and those parts of education that we have today. So in your elementary school classroom, you basically have aspects of those 9 facets that Fethullah Gülen mentions in the Statue of Our Souls.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just seeing all these connections, it also shows us that, yeah, he, I think, mentioned almost all aspects of education, like many other practitioners. I was actually also about to ask the role of teachers So in your work, you made connections between Maria Montessori's viewpoints on the teacher role models and Gülen's. Would you like to tell us more about the teacher role models and the educational perspective of Gülen?
Yes, Maria Montessori's work is really extraordinary. I mean, she came from medical background, first women in Italy to have been acknowledged in such a leadership capacity, whose writings were eloquent and translated into languages in many different countries. Her work, based on how students become adapted to all of the learning that they can in that model of Gülen's, the idea of the educator, where the student really is accommodating, assimilating, and adapting, getting used to things. A young child can, for instance, in curiosity, touch the stove, and that reaction from touching the stove causes pain. And the next time, maybe she wants to just touch it lightly. And so she does, and it's not as painful as that first time. That's an example of accommodation, assimilation, and she's adapting to the fact that the beauty of the flame is one thing, but the danger of it is another, and how we adapt to things. And Montessori was creating a kind of experiential education. Now, many public school teachers and Hizmet teachers borrow from Montessori her ideas, and many Montessori teachers borrow from the public schools. I recently, in my own neighborhood, a Montessori school is doing good work, but I came across a parent who was very concerned because what her child was experiencing was very similar to what was going on in the public schools, which this parent did not particularly like. And that is that a teacher, and I guess in the Montessori school, was borrowing from the emphasis in the public schools of accountability, meaning testing. And this has been one of the real dangers in what we're experiencing in the United States. One of the writers who I have mentioned in the book said that American education could become so accountable that it's of no account. I think that's a warning signal that we have overdone the testing business. And the idea in the Montessori school in my neighborhood was that perhaps there are things going on that you need not attend to, because as soon as you emphasize that, you are losing track of the educator that Fethullah Gülen talks about, who knows that the experiential learning in the Montessori school is a model, and that the emphasis on testing is satisfied best by the teacher who is instilling information on the student. Now, I'd like to qualify that, because I think we have to qualify and look at the affinities. There are tests that are very valuable. There is research that is very valuable. I conducted a worldwide program through the Gülen Institute of Houston, where students from 37 nations participated in a writing, and 26 American states that participated in a writing exercise, and I wrote the prompts for this. Those were for students to receive awards in Washington, D.C. and Congress and the Rayburn Building. And we had that going on for 6 years. So I'm not disparaging the idea of testing. It's the testing of a third party for, well-intentioned reasons. People want accountability because there's an expense of taxes that fund the schools. But that accountability is a third party, and that third party is too remote from the very intimate interests of the student and the parent and the teacher.
Right. I hope these kind of achievements and successes are going to be more and more. in all schools and everywhere. We would like to see our students that they're successing in their lives. Doesn't matter wherever they are and whoever they are.
Mm-hmm.
And in chapter 6, you presented the theories and ideas of the US-based intellectual Benjamin Bloom and his taxonomy. So that's one of the very well-known taxonomies all around the world. All the education people know about that. And you provided also a diagram that represents a taxonomy of Gülen, which I have never come across before. And I don't want to reveal too much about your great account, but could you also please briefly share the similarities between the two?
Yes, I think that Benjamin Bloom's work on how students learn according to different time is something that we should pay more attention to. Bloom is saying that in terms of teaching, students can learn, but not necessarily all because they're in the fourth grade. That some students learn later on. It's very interesting because if you take two students in the 11th grade and you look at essentially their potential in terms of the IQ, which is something I don't really put a lot of stock in, but let's just arbitrarily say this as a measurement. If you have two students, one who has a sort of average IQ of 100% and the other student maybe 180%, and they're in the same grade, you may have two students with a lot of similarities, but in terms of maturity and realizing their potential in terms of that last stage in Piaget, that really gifted student isn't going to be mature compared to his classmate with an IQ of 100%, of 100, until he's 30 or she's 37 years old. And that's when, in fact, that kind of talent is realized. So in terms of the fellow student, she is immature. In terms of where she is in grade 11 and when she will be in 37, she's immature in terms of herself. So we may say that this is a very interesting kind of diversity that you have in one classroom when you get beyond the idea that everybody's the same age. Bloom's work on cognitive and affective domains, the only issue I have with that is that they should be reversed. And this is where I would have put in a chapter on Louise Rosenblatt's work. Because what Louise Rosenblatt was discussing in her two books, one published in 1938 and the other in 1978, she was looking at how the affective domain should precede the cognitive domain. And I think that's consistent with what Fethullah Gülen is saying when he identifies the teacher who is teaching the student essentially all the information that the teacher wants in the brain, in the blank slate of the student. That's not like the educator who's seeing how the student has a great deal of education and needs to go through the process of accommodation and assimilation to adapt and grow according to whether she has the IQ of 100 or 180. And so I think that Bloom developed scales that are of great help in terms of levels. But on the other hand, I think that that it was necessarily his idea, but the emphasis on the cognitive first and then the affective makes things upside down, because that cognitive is what gets high scores on tests. So in other words, we're back essentially to that view that Gülen sees as the teacher as opposed to the educator. And what Louise Rosenblatt said, that if we take something like a poem by Wordsworth, we can tell the students what it's all about. But Louise Rosenblatt said that's a little bit like eating somebody else's food before they've had a chance to even have their own dish of that food. So I think that this idea of the experiential that you find in Dewey, Montessori, Moffat is all important, and Gulen. And at the same time, you have these cognitive structures. Now, I'd like to just add one thing about the work of James Britton in England, the development of writing ability study, because what he found in the 5 classes that students matriculated through grade 7, grade 9, grade 11, and first year of college, was that because of how the teacher assumes a role, the role of examiner, as opposed to the role of the trusted adult, as opposed to the teacher as correspondent, as opposed to the teacher as mentor, that each of these roles of the teacher result in the 5 subject areas differently. And empirically, what he proved was that in English and in religious education, students acquired at the highest level of Bloom's taxonomy cognitively. In science, some at that highest level, but not any in the levels of history and social studies. That tells me that the teachers in Wales and in England from the 42 schools were emphasizing essentially what they should know about what is the capital of Peru. And the difference between that and, say, a teacher facing students and saying, Jonathan, what's the capital of Peru? And Jonathan says, I think I know it ain't La Paz. Now, what's happened there? That student, Jonathan, is conveying a message to his own fellow students that he's essentially coming from a position of not going to be playing the education game. In other words, the student in that classroom, the classroom itself is a social body, and that's what I get at in chapter 9. And that social body is what the teacher is dealing with. And how do you bring in, rather than the teacher I just gave an example of, who's asking about capitals somewhere, is pitching it for the right answer, the cognitive answer. And so that's essentially missed opportunities for a learning experience.
Thank you. So I hope, in the education, we will be able to bring all these affective, cognitive, and psychomotor abilities, domains together. I think we still need to achieve that. Mm-hmm. And in the last chapter, there is the image of a 14th century painting, a fresco that is in the Spanish chapel in Florence. Sort of fresco features 2 intellectuals, one of which is from Christian and the other is from Muslim traditions. That there are, aside from other intellectuals, there are 2 intellectuals, and you use this image to explain the 2 terms, tabli and temsil. And I would like to hear from you more about this interesting fresco and its connection to these Arabic-rooted terms, if you also explain the terms to our audience. And I'm going to share it with the audience so they can see it. And
this is a painting by Andreas de Buono of Florence in 1635. And the title of the painting is The Triumph of St. Thomas. And it's only one of many, many similar paintings in the genre of the Triumph of St. Thomas. Gozzoli painted a campus. We know the theme best by Raphael, who painted the School of Athens. That's not really its title, the School of Athens. It's in fact the Triumph of St. Thomas Aquinas. Ghirlandaio from also painted one. But in the center of that, you'll see a man with a book, a priest, and that is St. Thomas Aquinas. And he's holding a book, and it's called The Triumph of, the Summa Theologica. Beneath him is Averroes, whose name was Ibn Rushd. He was a philosopher in Cordoba. and most influential figure who in fact brought Greek thought to Europe. We, in the European tradition, did not get most of the Greek thought by way of Rome. We got it from Morocco, from the Arab world. The Republic that you read as a freshman in college, that came by way of Fez, Morocco. So I think that what's interesting in this painting is the lower panel running across. You'll see 14 figures. They are kind of idealized knowledge in women form running across. If you look at the left of St. Thomas, you'll see 7 different figures. And beneath those figures, you have historical characters. You have in white over at the far side, you have Aristotle, and you have Euclid. And above Euclid is geometry. Above Aristotle is logic. Above Pynchon is grammar. Above I think it's Cicero is rhetoric, and then you have Pliny, not Pliny, but you have Euclid. You have from the Bible Tobias, the musician, in the category of music. And if you think about it, each one of these subject areas, astronomy, geometry, arithmetic, grammar, writing or rhetoric, if you will, logic, every one of these are what the elementary school teacher in the state of California takes in that one elementary school teacher's class. And then in high school has to take a class in the different departments, which are just simply a higher kind of level than these 7 to one side. On the other side, you have figures who are part of what we call the sacred subjects of education, as opposed to the secular subjects of education. And those sacred have to do with really what should be done in terms of apologetics or a number of other categories within the Roman Catholic Church.
So the sacred ones are these 5 figures right next to the Pope? Can we say that?
Those come from the Old Testament.
Okay.
But the bottom ones are the ones that I'm looking at where it comes to Tabligh and to Temsil. If I came across this in that chapel in Florence recently, and what I found so fascinating is that if you look at the sacred in the Islamic culture, you would not have those same 7 figures. You would have the Holy Quran, you'd have the Hadith, you'd have perhaps the Sharia, according to the culture in which one is. But so these would be the Tabligh. In other words, that which would be more of a kind of directional for a moral life. Whereas on the other side, the 7 are Temsil. So what you have really is more a kind of, in the Roman Catholic Church, it would be called the profane or the secular or the inquiry base, which is look into these subjects in order to accommodate, assimilate, and become a part of a citizen in your world. So in other words, what I see here is the commonality of the Islamic and the Christian traditions. And it's something that I think a lot of people should understand.
Yeah. So it's also like representation of both, right? Like both Temsil is the representation of
exactly. And I think the important thing with Fethullah Gülen is that his schools only emphasize the categories on the right, on that one side of Thomas Aquinas and Averroes. The Hizmet schools do not include education on the other side, because what Gülen has advanced as people who follow his ideas should institute is conform to the society in which you live. And so, for instance, at the Bay Tech Academy on Alcatraz in my town, my city of origin, you have these very same 7 subjects, which the elementary school teacher teaches within that one classroom. And so it's not necessarily a new idea. This is an example of that observation of affinities in objects. And we all have so much more in common than what we have going on, frankly, today, where there's so much division. And I think it's centered on, for instance, the book. Whether it's the Holy Quran, whether it's the Bible, the New Testament, the Old Testament, what you have is in the book the reading of a whole discourse. We now live in and it provides, I saw today Ta-Nehisi Coates, the wonderful writer, African-American writer, saying that he so objected to tweets because he said that, you can't analyze what's going on and come up with an opinion until you've had time. A tweet is like a bark. And, the animal kingdom has dogs and they bark, and it alerts fright or flight. And that's not what books offer. We've got to get somehow people away and back into the books.
Definitely. And thank you for adding a new meaning and a perspective to this awesome painting. And I have one last question. We're about to finish. So there are several of these aforementioned intellectuals who faced hardships and oppressions. You have already related one of them in your book to Gülen, in that sense, Kurt Hahn, one of those intellectuals that is basically mentioned, but I know that there are more. And what do you think about the effects of the political unrest or societal problems on their educational models? How did the hardships shape them?
Well, this is one of the perennial problems going back to Athens and Socrates or Jesus. We're looking at a whole world, and in the intellectual world, you had Vygotsky, who it's curious because here was Vygotsky in the Soviet Union writing a critique of Jean Piaget's essays and studies, and he saw a different way to take it. Well, what happened was that Vygotsky came under fire because he was exploring the same kind of behavior as he was going against what was popular in both the United States and Russia at the time, and that is the Lockean notion of a blank slate. And in fact, it's a no-no to get into the black box. That was actually the language that they used to use. So Vygotsky died of tuberculosis at the young age of 37. And it wasn't until the 1960s, after the death of Stalin and Khrushchev brought about the thaw, that Vygotsky's ideas became well-known. And I think that's the way it works, that ideas live longer than lives. And lives that share that affinity for observations in objects where no brotherhood exists to passive minds wins out in the long run. I think that is the message of Temsel. I think that is essentially the message that we have, that if you put your efforts towards love and community, that in the long run, karma in the Indian tradition, it simply works out for the best of all.
Yeah, very well said. Thank you. Yeah, ideas stands more. So thank you so much for this great conversation. It was a pleasure to have you. There is still so much to talk about, and I myself would like to read more works of yours. And I know you're working on a new book as well. So thank you for joining us today. And
Thank you
today
very much.
thank you. We had Professor Tom Gage with us. His account is a product of a deep research and a thorough academic study. It brings remarkable educational practitioners into attention and links them to that of Fethullah Gülen's dialogue on education. I definitely suggest everyone read this wonderful work, and thank you all for watching us.